a mutation. And what they want to get is a protein code that's attractive for semiconductor particles. So they just start with the first mutation that they make like gene technology, and then they put semiconductor nanoparticles into the petri dish where all the viruses are. And then some mutations express an affinity to semiconductors. So at some virus codes, protein codes, the semiconductors stick. They wash away all the rest, take only the ones that connected to the semiconductors. Then they make a second run of mutation, and so on. And they do it like an artificial evolution in 1 week. And at the end, you have a virus that has a genome that builds a protein code where all along, you see that on the right side, all along semiconductor nanoparticles get attracted. And what you want to do with that is construct nanowires for electronics. So this is maybe a new concept of exploiting nature, nature's nanotechnology, if you would like to say so, for creating something different like drugs, insulin. That has already been done 20 years ago. But Angela Belcher's aim is that one day she could create like circuits in a petri dish that are constructed by the viruses. Another thing is nanomedicine. This is a very big thing because there are already a few concepts that work quite nice. One is from Berlin that was developed here at the Charité. And what you do is you have super paramagnetic nanoparticles. This is just iron oxide. Coat them with some kinds of sugar molecules, and then you inject this into a tumor, brain tumor. That's where they started, because normally you won't get a drug through the blood-brain barrier if you just inject it into the bloodstream. And then because they are so tiny, they move into the cells. What you can see in the pictures are some cells, and the darker spots are these paramagnetic nanoparticles that have gathered in the cells. It's like in one cell, it's about 1 million, 100,000 to 1 million. And if you apply then an alternating magnetic field, these particles, because they are paramagnetic, they start vibrating. And this vibration, this is just motion, thermal motion, and that's heating up the tumor cells up to 70 degrees, but only very localized in the brain. It's not that the whole brain gets heated, it's really only the tumor. And so what they found in trials with, of course, mice at the beginning and rats and now even humans is that they have a very good rate that the tumors disappear and the people really get cured from brain tumors. What had not been possible or at this rate with, let's say, chemical therapies, something like that. And that will be probably in 2007 ready for application in hospitals. I have no idea how much it will cost, but so this is also more than only a proof of principle and a prototype. This is a concept that really works. But there are things that don't work. And these are the big dreams of nanotechnology, mostly. The other stuff that I showed you, you could say, well, this is very interesting and fascinating, but it's only one step more than what we already had. And what it is just create a macro object from millions of nano parts. Because, as I said with the transistor, nanotube transistor, it's very nice to have one in the laboratory that works, but then as you know that on processors today you have tens of millions of transistors, which are all created in the photolithography at the same time. You can't do that with nanotube transistors because you have no device, no tool to move 1 million nanotube transistors in the right position on the chip. And I think this is one very crucial step for the success, where you could say, well, this time we have really something new in nanotechnology that we did not have before, which has no precursor. The second thing is, which is highly debated, has been since 1986 when this guy, Eric Drexler, introduced this in a book that was called Engines of Creation. And his idea was an assembly atom by atom with a device that he called an assembler. And the assembler got very popular in Michael Crichton's novel Prey. The problem with this concept is that all the parts that Drexler envisioned for this assembler, they only exist as computer models. There's nothing in reality. He published a big book in '92 called Nanosystems, where he had showed lots of simulations, chemical modeling, quantum mechanics, all that stuff. And these are two of the graphics that are in the book. What you see is a robotic arm that consists of 4 million atoms. It's about 100 nanometers high, and this tip, the working tip, that would, like in a factory, grasp an atom, put it there, and take the next atom, put it there, all that. And you would have millions and billions of these robotic arms. Another thing was that he said the transport of all the working material, molecules, particles, whatever, he would do that with these small wheels that you see, like a conveyor belt. The funny thing is, what he does is he takes the technology of the 19th century and just puts it down to the nanoscale. Well, why is it highly debated? Because, okay, some scientists don't like Drexler. They are very frank on that. They say he's an unpleasant guy. But apart from that, others say, well, all his ideas, they are not scientific. That doesn't work. The laws of physics don't allow that. But there's no consensus among the scientists if it's really impossible or not. So at the moment, we cannot say. And we cannot say if somebody someday will come up with this kind of assembler technology. It could be in 20 years, in 50, never, nobody knows. Meanwhile, because Drexler, there was a lot of criticism. The criticism was also because of the fact that all these tiny assemblers, which would act like, let's say, a swarm, like in Crichton's novel, could get out of control. And last year he reacted on that, and he abandoned his concept from '86, and he said, no, I think we can do it without assemblers. What he now sees is like a desktop factory where you have all these robotic arms just in a PC box, PC-sized box somewhere at home. And of course, what you can't see is that these robotics arms on the left in the picture, they get smaller and smaller down to the nanoscale. So, but he doesn't know either how to do that. So it's all very theoretical. An interesting science fiction book about that was Neil Stephenson's Diamond Age. I think Neil Stephenson had more success with his Cryptonomicon. This is from 1995, and he just described a society where this molecular fabricator technology is already there. And you could go, if you're aware of some of the lower third or half of society and have not a lot of money or whatever, you could go to public meta compilers and get a sushi out or a blanket for the night because you have no home, something like that. One guy from the camp of Drexler, Robert Freitas, he introduced a concept in 1999, which is an artificial red blood cell. He calls it a respirocyte. And it's like 1 micrometer across. It consists of lots of pumps and energy stations, all that stuff. And what he says is, or what is the thinking behind these guys, is that the humans are so incomplete and so imperfect that we have to improve them. So get out all these natural red blood cells and get in the respirocytes, and then you can climb the Mount Everest without any extra oxygen. You could even sprint down 1 kilometer with the speed of a 100-meter race. It's all about efficiency for these guys. Okay, so far we have not touched a very interesting subject, which is slowly coming up in the last 2 years. That is the question, well, are there any hazards? How hazardous is nanotechnology? The debate is hampered by the fact that the chemists say, well, we do only chemistry, ultrafine particles in diesel engines, that's nothing new. We have had that for 50 years, 60 years, so there is nothing new about nanotechnology. But when it gets to funding, getting money, of course, everybody says, well, nanotechnology is so revolutionary, so it's a bit difficult to see what's really happening there. So I propose we could look at it with regard to the potential ecological hazards, and let's say we have a classification like contained nanotechnology. There was the nanoelectronics or the microscopes where the nano component is really fixed in the device, so nothing happens, probably. Nobody knows anything about recycling these things, but maybe that's a bit too early. The second is bioactive, and that's where it gets interesting, because you could have these small non-biological particles like nanotubes just free in the environment. Or what could be done with nanomedicine? Some weird ideas. The third disruptive would be Drexler's assemblers, that stuff, or artificial viruses. Artificial viruses, one has already been assembled 2 years ago by Craig Venter, who helped sequencing the human genome. And he put down a virus genome completely from scratch. This thing doesn't exist in nature. So even this is not completely out of reach. So if we look at the class, what I call class 2A, because class 1 is, I think, no big problem, the bioactive nanotechnology. What toxicologists have already shown is that these particles, they can move into the brain, liver, spleen, bone marrow, pass the blood-brain barrier because they are too small. They can enter into cells, and they can do some not so nice things in cells. For instance, they can cause oxidative stress. This is, you have a free electron, a radical somewhere, and this could, for instance, start a transcription of certain genes that should not be transcripted. And then something happens in your cells, and maybe you get an inflammation somewhere in the lung or whatever. And there are already a few studies where they have shown in the petri dish, but also in rats and mice, that there are problems, or in fish. For instance, the fish thing that was last year, that was got a lot of press, at least in the nano media. They put these buckyballs, the small footballs, into an aquarium, and 48 hours later, these fish had brain damage because they had the buckyballs in their brains. But this is only very preliminary. The question now is what to do about it. At the moment, there is nothing, no regulation for nanomaterials because, oh Jesus, I see that, but I think I get through it. The Royal Society, Royal Academy of Engineering last year published a very important and very interesting report, and they recommended that factories and research laboratories should treat manufactured nanoparticles as if they were hazardous. So they have to prove that they are innocent. The chemical industry, on the other hand, says, well, where's the problem? As long as they don't do damage, we don't need any regulation. So this is the debate now. Do you start regulating now? And do you ask from the chemical industry that they prove that it's not damaging? Or do you wait until shit happens and then you can start regulating? Yeah? And one of the experts says, well, that's his assessment, what is the state of toxicological information knowledge at the moment? He says it's only very limited. So no company can make any serious risk assessment with a toxicological, yeah, I see that. knowledge that they have at the moment.